Nick Freeman is here. He's, of course, Mr. Loophole, a man that we speak to often on this show. We haven't spoken for a while. And Nick Freeman and I, amongst other people, tried to put together a petition to petition Parliament to make sure that cyclists would have to be registered, would have to be insured, and would have to have some kind of licence to drive, because there's a terrible story this morning about a cyclist who killed a pensioner while racing around Regent's Park at 29 miles an hour, and apparently there is no law under which he can be punished. Let's find out why. Nick, a very good morning to you. Welcome back.
Good morning, Mike.
Thanks very much for joining us. A speeding cyclist by the name of Brian Fitzgerald, a director at Credit Suisse, was in a fast group, an organisation called the Muswell Hill Peloton Cycling Club. I haven't been to Regent's Park for a while, but I'm told it's literally like a velodrome there. People ram themselves around at 29, 30 miles an hour, 9 miles an hour over the speed limit, and yet he's not going to be prosecuted after hitting a woman who later died.
Well, he's not in a mechanically propelled vehicle, and as you rightly say, you and I petitioned the government some time ago to reconsider the legislation. It hasn't happened. This was a tragic accident, and it highlights the urgent need, doesn't it, for proper legislation to be put in place. I mean, he was travelling in a group. They were racing anti-clockwise at 7 o'clock in the morning at an average speed of 25 miles an hour. Which is 25% in excess of the speed limit for cars.
Well, you'd get a ticket for that, wouldn't you, in a car?
You definitely would, and up to 29 miles an hour, which is about 30% more. So whilst there's no speed limit, there are the Highway Code and the Road Traffic Act do capture cyclists for some offences, but there is no offence, as we say, of speeding, no offence of drink driving, drug driving. There's no offence of causing death by dangerous driving, causing death by driving without due care and attention, or even causing serious injury with those offences of dangerous or due care. So Parliament needs to get a grip of this. I walk around Regent's Park regularly because I'm often down there, for work, and it is like a racetrack. So I've seen photographs, and I don't know whether this represents the case, but they were actually cycling 4 abreast. That's the photographs that have been shown in the Mail. Now, I don't know whether that depicts what Mr. Fitzgerald was doing, but Peloton is a group of racing cyclists. Right. Now, racing, if you're racing, you're cycling dangerously. And isn't the point of 20 mile an hour speed limits for cars to show that if, God forbid, there's a collision, there's less chance of a serious injury or death following? Why doesn't that apply to cyclists? Surely it follows, doesn't it, that if there are cyclists who are now second in the hierarchy of the most vulnerable, pedestrians being at the top, when they're cycling, they need to be vigilant to what is on the pavement. They can't be racing because that per se is dangerous if they're doing that on the road. And when they see this old lady at 7 in the morning, 81-year-old lady walking her dog, they're not going to hear. I suspect there were no bells on the cyclist, which again is in contravention of the Highway Code guidelines. They owe a specific duty to vulnerable people. Again, I don't think they complied with that. And she stepped off without question, without being aware of their presence. Had they not been racing, had they been travelling slower, had they had bells, had they been vigilant, they could have avoided it, or alternatively caused her far less injury, which may not have resulted in her death. So we have this farcical situation at the moment where cyclists can cycle with impunity at whatever speed. I mean, you and I know, we've discussed it, you're in a car, struggling to stay at 20, and you're being overtaken by cyclists who are supposed to, if you're in a car overtaking a cyclist, you're supposed to be at least 1.5 metres. Right. They're on your bumper, they're on your offside wing, they're on your near side wing, totally flouting the provisions that were put in place to protect them. So look, this is a tragic accident, and it really does highlight the need for someone to get hold of this. We want to encourage cycling, but it needs to be done safely. Yes. And cyclists do need to comply with the law. I don't understand why Mr. Fitzgerald wasn't at least prosecuted. I mean, for cycling without due care and attention, cycling dangerously, it would have resulted in a fine, that is all. Possibly, if he was convicted of cycling dangerously, they could have actually removed his driving licence. Right. There is a discretionary to do that.
Well, yeah, because quite often my sort of various rows with people on social media who cycle, they say, oh, we don't need to be registered because we've already got a driving licence and we've already got insurance through that. And you go, well, yeah, but that's not quite the same thing, because I don't know who you are when you drive past me on a bike. I don't know who you are if you run into somebody on a bike. And we have seen previous cyclists being prosecuted. I know it doesn't happen very often. So I'm amazed that they couldn't find some form of prosecution that they could utilise.
Well, you will remember the case of Briggs.
Yeah.
The racing bike, it was a few years ago now, that had no brakes. It wasn't fit for the road. And if you remember, Mike, there was no actual legislation in place to deal with death by dangerous cycling.
Yeah.
And he was actually, he went to prison because he was prosecuted for wanton and furious cycling, the offences against the Persons Act.
Which is Victorian, right?
1861.
Yeah.
Your history is better than mine. So what we clearly need, we want to encourage cyclists, but they need to be legally compliant. And if you look at the accidents with pedestrians now, they're getting injured. The figures are rising exponentially, and those are only the reported figures. And we have no means of tracing many cyclists. We've now got e-bikes in the frame. We've got e-scooters in the frame. We need to be able to identify they all need to be legally compliant. Yeah. And if it doesn't happen, more and more people are going to die and be seriously injured. And I'm afraid the government have got blood on their hand. I know we only raised just over 10,000, but it's a serious matter that needs to be addressed. And for some reason, maybe it's not a popular thing, the government want to ignore it. They've got bigger fish to fry. But this is potentially quite huge, because we don't want to hear many more tragic stories like this.
Exactly right. Great to talk to you again, Nick. Thanks very much indeed. Nick Freeman, lawyer, of course, and for a long time an advocate of proper, reasonable and commonsensical, let's face it, regulations for cyclists. How is it possible that you can be on a vehicle, it's still a vehicle, I don't care whether it has an engine or not, which can kill people, but you don't have to be regulated? It makes no sense at all.